You are listening to the Information Security Innocent Podcast, Episode 12, originally released on June 19th, 2020. My name is Josh Amishav. This week we're going to talk about effective brute forcing for bug bounty hunting and pen testing. Specifically, we're going to focus on how to create custom word lists to increase our chances of finding sensitive data. When everyone's using the same brute force tools like GoBuster or Deer Search, we need to be smart if we want to find things that other folks aren't finding. Direct support for this podcast comes from BreachSense, the data breach monitoring platform. What's the easiest way hackers break into your network? By using valid usernames and passwords. Hackers collect millions of leaked credentials from almost daily data breaches. Without visibility into which of your employees or users' credentials have been leaked, it's tough to protect against this. Integrate BreachSense's powerful yet easy-to-use API into your existing security solutions to prevent account takeover and stop online fraud. Let's start by defining what a word list is and why we want to use one. A word list is simply a list of words that help us enumerate something specific, where the theme of the word list changes depending on what we're trying to enumerate. For example, a word list for subdomain enumeration will be very different from a word list to enumerate default files and directories. Having a focus list will save significant time and resources. Say, for example, you wanted to brute force a 7-character directory name using just mixed case letters. Even if you manage to submit 500 requests per second, it still takes several years to complete. Brute forcing with a custom word list is helpful in a number of situations. It can be used for subdomain enumeration to find potential targets, as well as credential stuffing to log in and gain access to your target's app. It's also very useful at guessing things like headers, API methods, and parameters when mapping out the attack surface. It's important to have different lists for different purposes. For example, my list can be broken down into 5 different high-level categories. The first are directory lists, which look for things like /admin or /dev. The next category are lists of common file names like info.php or swagger.json. The next category contains lists of default files belonging to various software packages like JBoss or GitHub. The next category contains things like backup or log file formats, and these often have formats like year, month, day, or day, month, year. And finally, a miscellaneous category, which is a random list of interesting file names or paths that other folks have found and written up in blog posts or bounty write-ups. We need to be intentional about what categories we include in our customized word lists, meaning there's no sense in searching for ASPX files on an Apache server running mod.php. Another thing to note is that word lists are helpful not only in the recon stage, but also when we find a default index or homepage that returns a 403 or 404 response. Brute forcing directories and file names can help figure out what the web app actually does. Now let's talk about how to create a word list. There are lots of default lists out there. In fact, even Google released their fuzzing list, and I'll link to it in the show notes, but it's kind of small. Hashes.org is a great resource for cracked passwords, but personally, I like to use the SecList repository as my baseline when creating custom lists. SecList breaks down its list into high-level categories like discovery, web shells, and payloads, and then into more specific categories like cross-site scripting payloads for Flash, or default directories on IAS. Now, while this is a good start, everyone's using default lists like this. We need to customize in order to find things that others aren't finding. First off, you should combine the relevant base files from SecList so that could include things like default Apache and PHP files, as well as the RAF large word list. And another problem with lists like this, or the default lists and other tools like Deerbuster or Nikto, is that they're mostly static and perhaps based on dated material. Google's BigQuery lets us generate customized word lists based on current trends. For example, we can use BigQuery to pull data from GitHub based on things like the top JSP or ASPX files, and then save our results to our Google Drive or download them locally and parse them with something like awk or cut. Now, if we don't want to use BigQuery directly, we can use tools like CommonSpeak. CommonSpeak generates word lists based on file type extensions, subdomains, and file paths. The word lists are based on Google's public datasets like certificate transparency logs, HTTP archive, Hacker News, and Stack Overflow. In order to use CommonSpeak, you need to install the Google Cloud SDK and set up a Google Cloud project and generate a generated JSON credentials file. I should also note that your first terabyte of data queried is free, but afterwards you pay for that, and using BigQuery a lot, it'll add up. Now, Nomnom recently gave a talk where we discussed another interesting technique to generate relevant word lists. He downloaded the homepage of his target, and then downloaded RFC 1866. He removed the HTML tags using a tool of his called Talk, and sorted the file contents based on unique words. Then he used the Unix command com to compare the files and output any words that were unique to the target's index page. The idea is those words might also be used in a file name or directory and can be added to our custom word list. Now, say for example, we want to enumerate directories on our target. In addition to the unique words we generated using the previous technique, we can enumerate paths and figure out how our target has named things in the past via the Wayback Machine or archive.org. Now, there are a few tools that can help us automate this. GAU, or GAU, which stands for Get All URLs, or my preference is Wayback URL. We need to echo the target's domain name, pipe it through Wayback URL, and then remove everything but the paths, and perhaps run it through sort-u to remove any repeat entries. You can also use Burp Suite for this. If you go through the web app, you proxy it through Burp, and then under the sitemap, you right-click on the target, and then click Copy URLs in this host, and paste the results into a file. And then you can use the tips we talked about last week to clean up those results and only save the file and directory names. While the Wayback Machine can help us find old paths and API endpoints that still work, it's always a good idea to keep historical data on our target, which will most likely be significantly more detailed than what archive.org has, and allows us to build word lists based on naming conventions that they've used in the past. And once we build our custom word list, we can use tools like Burp Intruder or FF to recursively look for files under those paths. To summarize, custom word lists help us save time and find things that other testers will miss. It's important to use a targeted list based on what you're searching for, meaning a list of popular subdomains won't be very helpful if you're brute forcing injected request headers. Make sure you use the right tool for the job. When generating custom lists, I like to use seclists as my baseline and then customize that based on the technology the target uses. Meaning, if the target is running some new JavaScript framework, I'll use BigQuery to generate a list of appropriate paths and file names that I should check as well. That's it for today. If you have any feedback or questions, please contact me at podcast@breachsense.io. And if you got value from this episode, then please share it with a friend. See y'all next week.